Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to Tadaima and to this panel that is about solidarity and liberation work sponsored by the Minidoka Pilgrimage Planning Committee. My name is Erin Shigaki, and I'm a member of said committee. I'm also a member of To Do for Solidarity, and I am really happy to bring together three leaders in abolition that are working in sort of different parts of the field. I'm going to do a little bio on each of them now. Gerline M. Joseph is a woman on the move with a passion to serve her community. An activist, servant, mother, sister, niece, and wife, Ms. Joseph dedicates her life to bring awareness to issues that affect us all locally and globally, including immigration, socioeconomic and racial justice, domestic violence, and child sexual abuse. Ms. Joseph is the co-founder and executive director of the Haitian Bridge Alliance. The mission of the bridge is to guide, elevate, and empower Haitian and other Black immigrants from the Caribbean and Africa through advocacy, organizing, outreach, direct services, including but not limited to immigration detention visits, transitional housing, legal assistance, and educational, social, and cultural programs so that they may fully integrate into American society while maintaining their cultural heritage as they continue to navigate the complex immigration system in the United States. Welcome, Gerline. Silky Shaw is the Executive Director of Detention Watch Network, DWN, a national coalition building power to abolish immigration detention in the United States. She has worked as an organizer on issues related to immigration detention, mass incarceration, and racial and migrant justice for over 15 years. In her time at DWN, she has helped transform the organization into a national leader in the immigrant rights movement, leading campaigns to expose the system and building the capacity of grassroots members to take action. Prior to joining DWN 2009, Silky worked at grassroots leadership in Texas, fighting the expansion of immigrant jails on the US-Mexico border, and at the independent news program Democracy Now! In New York. Welcome, Silky. Stanley N. Shikuma is a Sansei who grew up in Watsonville, California. His family members were incarcerated at Poston and Tule Lake during World War II. He is the president of Seattle Chapter JCL, and his community activities include To Do for Solidarity, Tule Lake Committee, From Hiroshima to Hope, NVC Foundation, APALA, Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, and La Resistencia. As a social activist, writer, and organizer, Stan helped start the first Asian American history course at Stanford University, opposed draft registration at UC Berkeley, pursue divestment from apartheid South Africa at the UW, and win redress and reparations for Japanese Americans removed and incarcerated during World War II. As a longtime taiko player, he also performs, writes, and lectures on the history, teaching, and performance of taiko in North America. Welcome, Stan, and welcome everyone again. Thank you for your time and your tireless work. I just want to start out by saying that this moment of uprising for Black lives has brought some words into mainstream media and conversation, and I thought we could start with those. The words that I'm thinking of are abolition and defund. So could we start with a definition of those words and how each of you came to this work? Maybe we start with Gerline.
Thank you so much, Erin, for having us. Abolitionist, abolition. You know, we can look at it at so many different ways, but we can start about looking at the abolition of slavery, right? It is to remove that is suppressing a person, a community, a group. So to completely take that away, to abolish it. And abolition is a need in order for people to be able to see freedom, in order for people to have true liberation things needs to be abolished. For example, as I can go back to the abolishment of slavery, to be able to take that away from our society, away from our community, away from our family, away from our world.
Wonderful. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that, Silky?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, abolition, I sort of made the decision to be a prison abolitionist in 2003 after going to a critical resistance conference and sort of reckoning with what it meant for us to be people who imprisoned people, and what that did to, you know, really just like taking somebody's liberty away and removing somebody's freedom and believing that, you know, no matter what, everybody deserves justice and deserves to be free, and understanding that like systems of harm, or not system, you know, systems of accountability need to be in place, but at the same time, like, we don't want to perpetuate the experience that people go through and through these systems of incarceration. So to me, abolition, as Gerline said, a lot of it is about how we think about removing the things that are preventing us getting to freedom, but also a lot of it is about imagining something else. Like, what does it mean for us to feel safe? What does it mean for us to feel free and to feel like we're in a world where we can thrive? And without abolishing those things that prevent that, we're never going to get there. And so that's a lot of the way that I think about that. And then I think on defund, you know, I think it's really making the sort of connection to not just the white supremacist or racist agendas that have existed, but also to the relationship to the economy and to capitalism and how much those are intertwined. And so the way that we get there is also removing the money that's going to these systems to continue that harm and that incarceration or deportation or all the other things that happen to prevent people from being free.
Stan, do you have anything to add regarding either of those two words?
Sure. I will have to admit that, you know, when I first heard defund the police, I was kind of like skeptical of it. And over the last year or two, being involved with Suda for Solidarity and La Resistencia, I've really been won over, because you look at the rate of incarceration that we have in this country, which is the largest in the world, and we have to wonder, why is that? And you look at the level of police budgets, like in Seattle, the police budget is more than the combined budgets that the city spends on education, healthcare, parks and recreation, art funding. So all the things that make society a good place to live are short-shrifted, and we pour it all into the police. So looking at what the police actually do and why they're doing it. So, you know, and it's actually not that fair to the police either. We dump on them, take care of mental health cases, take care of drug addiction and substance abuse, take care of homelessness. And the attitude or the response of society, the way that society has been treating it is quote unquote law and order. But what does that mean? That means that we're going to take a militarized approach. We're going to punish people for being poor, for being homeless, for having some kind of mental health crisis, rather than what kind of meds do they need, or counseling do they need, what kind of housing is available. And looking at solutions, we're just saying that we're criminalizing people's problems at the same time that we're also not giving them a livable minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of abolishing the police state is one of moving away from that law and order, punish people to make them conform to what those in power think they should be doing, and instead going towards public safety. What makes the public safe? Good education, good health, good jobs. And if we focus on that, then it makes sense to defund the police. If they're having more funding than all of those other social needs, and they're ending up killing people or harassing people in their homes and their streets, then we need to change the whole philosophy. And that's, I think, at the basis of it is we need a different vision of what we want the society to operate like, and get the militarization and everything has to be dealt with a gun, and move it more towards what's the human way to deal with the problems that we encounter. And I think that shift, that mindset has to be changed. And that's what I see as a big hope of the Black Lives Matter uprisings we've seen, is that that's what we're pushing for, that basic change.
Yeah, it certainly feels like a moment where we could take the opening and really crack it open. I don't think you had a chance, Geraldine, to offer any thoughts on the word defund if you want to. And you can also, I'd love to hear how you came into this work, because I don't think this was always your background. Is that right?
Correct. And as Sensei Stan mentioned, to me, to defund is to redirect that funding into community-based activities. One thing I always say is the pipeline of school to prison, right? The street to prison. Instead of, we saw how people, instead of providing after school programs for children to be able to learn, to be able to occupy their minds, all of those programs are taken out of the school system and leaving the children in the street corners. That's the only place they have to go to. And then they pick them up and put them in prison instead of providing opportunities for them to be able to provide for themselves. As Stan mentioned, to be able, what is public safety, right? If we have programs, after school programs for students to go to learn science, learn music, learn sport, learn all of those different things, instead of providing that money to the police. And in many states, we know that are being required to fulfill a quota, right? And then they go to those very underprivileged communities where they're able to bring those people into the criminal prison system. And I think defunding the police is to reallocate that money, that funding, to be able to provide public safety, better opportunities, so that we don't have to have the law and order constantly beating down on underprivileged communities. And then, as Silky mentioned, incarcerating them, and we see how this whole thing continues. So defunding the police is really giving power back to communities so that they can flourish. I am originally from Haiti. I was born in Haiti, but I grew up in New York. My family background is all about community service. Back home in Haiti, my father was the mayor of our city, and very involved in governorship of our state. So that was part of our upbringing, where my father will decide to, instead of paying our tuitions for school, he will go pay for somebody else because he knows somehow he'll be able to pay for ours. So serving has been part of our family. My mother had her own business, but I will watch her literally give away things to people. And I will think, but they didn't pay. And she will say, when they can, they will. And so that has been instilled into us, from the beginning. So when I moved from New York to California 15 years ago, I couldn't find communities. There were we didn't have a big Haitian community. And I moved into Orange County. We didn't even have a Black community per se in Orange County. So by trying to find community, build community, I became part of what we call Cali Haitian group. And then from there, we tried to do a lot of cultural events. I ended up representing Haiti in South Korea 6 years ago. And then I started a radio program here in Orange County to be able to bring different, what we call silent killers in our communities, such as child sexual abuse, domestic violence, mental health issues, and then even as an immigrant, immigration was not something that was in the forefront, right? It wasn't until the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, when I received a call as the quote-unquote Haitian here that they had some Black people at the border. And at first, they were trying to see where did they come from. Some people said they were from Haiti. Others said they were from the Congo, from different African countries. And so I just went to see what was happening. And I remember that first day, I met about 12 people, 12 young men and women. And by talking to them, I could not believe what they were saying, because the majority of them were survivors of the earthquake that happened in Haiti in 2010, killing over 300,000 people that day and leaving over 4 million people completely homeless. And a lot of them were part of the program, humanitarian program that went to Brazil. And they were part of the, manual labor, construction, helping for the World Cup, the Olympics, and all those different things. But unfortunately, as we all know, at the end of 2015, the economy of Brazil collapsed. The political aspect of Brazil also collapsed, then pushing those people out of the country. So those people decided to literally walk from Brazil to the United States. They crossed 11 countries and borders to be able to come to Tijuana to ask for asylum. And so that's how it started, with the 12 people I just wanted to go and see where they came from, to now. So what I say and what we say at the Haitian Bridge Alliance is that we went to the borders, so that because we heard we had our Haitian brothers and sisters there, but we ended up staying for everyone. Because once we arrived, we saw we had people from Guatemala, people from El Salvador, people from Honduras, people from the Congo, from Cameroon, from Eritrea, from China, from Bangladesh, from India. So we felt the need to stay for everyone. So that is how I came into the world.
Oh, thank you. That's very powerful. What about you, Stan, as a Japanese American? What has been your path?
Well, I got started, I was a student activist in college in the 70s and 80s, as you mentioned, and I got involved in the movement for redress and reparations for Japanese Americans. I think more recently, what's really got me involved is Tsuru for Solidarity and the Trump's imposition of a Muslim ban initially, and then later on the zero tolerance policy, where children were actually being forcibly separated from their families at the border. And that just triggered such a reaction within the Japanese American community and myself in particular, because seeing children imprisoned, seeing families separated, seeing mass incarceration of people for no good reason, just because they wanted to find a better life here, just really resonated with our history. Because my older brother was 4 years old when he was taken away and put in a prison camp in Poston, Arizona. my grandfather was almost taken away from the family, but he was saved by intervention by a white neighbor. But a lot of other families, parents, particularly the fathers, got taken away, and some people didn't see them for up to 3 years. So that whole history of family separation and child imprisonment really hits home. And when we did the Tule Lake pilgrimage in 2018, this was shortly after the zero tolerance policy was implemented. Everyone was feeling very, very angry. And so we held a rally, a protest rally at Tule Lake at the campsite with banners and placards. And we had everyone, even Nisei, 70, 80-year-old Nisei, out there saying, yeah, shut it down, no ICE. And from there, I got involved with La Resistencia, because Tsuru did, as part of our Day of Remembrance, remembering the Executive Order 9066, which was an authorization for locking everybody up in World War II. We did a program down at the Northwest Detention Center, a big rally in conjunction with La Resistencia. And since then, I've gotten more and more involved with La Resistencia, and so I met Silky through DWN. And that's how I got introduced to the whole concept of abolition and defund the police. So, and here I am.
And we are glad. Yeah, something you said, about many of the fathers and leaders of the Japanese American community being taken away first before the mass incarceration reminds me that the end of surveillance is also part of defunding these systems, right? That's a tool that has been used against folks for time immemorial, and it's sort of worth thinking about, should you give your money to Amazon or not when they're supporting these surveillance systems, things like that. Silky, did you want to say anything more about your path? I know you mentioned it in your first comments, and you've been in the work for a long time. So we would love to hear any other anecdotes you have.
Well, I should also mention I'm also a member of La Resistencia, which I have not put in my bio, but wonderful to be in this collective with Stan. And just to say, there's a lot of organizations like La Resistencia around the country, but for folks in the Northwest, like, spaces to engage about thinking about how to really stop detention. It's really, there's a lot of organizing. And so it's just an exciting time to be a part of the work, as depressing sometimes as it can feel. But yeah, I mean, I grew up in Texas. My parents are immigrants from India, and grew up in Houston, which is one of the most diverse places in the country. And I think I didn't really realize how good I had it in some ways in terms of community there. But, had close friends who were undocumented, and, had some sort of understanding from being a kid of immigrants. But the thing that really was a big piece for me that sort of led me on this path, I was just an activist student wanting to do whatever we do. And then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden there was this, huge attention being paid to South Asians, Arabs, Middle Eastern folks. And so I think realizing that impact on a community that I'm connected to, or communities. And at the time, I think there was this question of how people were going to be targeted. And I, at the Asian American college student I was, I ended up working with a friend who was Japanese American on a short video, and we looked at all these all this old footage from the internment camps and started learning about Japanese internment and what happened during that period of time, and sort of making that connection to how detention was growing and targeting people. And it was such a big part of my, like, really the resistance and the, you know, that sort of, those lessons around Japanese American internment were such a huge influence on how I started to think about detention specifically. And then I think later, as I mentioned, critical resistance, I think it became clear to me, it's like we're talking about immigration detention, but all of this is just incarceration and learning. You know, I remember learning, like, the US incarcerates 25% of the world's prison population. It has 25% of the world's prison population, but 5% of the world's population, and just realizing, like, actually incarceration doesn't have to be the answer for everything, and how that really just reoriented me around everything. And I think everything that folks have been mentioning around policing and incarceration and slavery and everything, it's just, it's all like, okay, actually, what does it mean for us to imagine a different world? And so I think that was a big part of bringing me into this and committing me to being an organizer, then turned executive director at some point, as that happens at times. But but yeah, I feel really grateful for especially the lessons from the Black liberation movement and the lessons from the Asian American, you know, activist movement over the years to really guide me on this path that I've come to.
Let's go on to another question. Let's start with Gerline. What is the most pressing issue in your community during this moment of national reckoning?
Wow, there are so many issues that don't really know where to begin. You know, as an immigrant, as a Black immigrant, as a Black woman, you know, a Black immigrant woman, living in this moment, just living period has been a daily struggle. Just to exist, just to just to be able to just be yourself. So when we look at the current fight for Black lives and the movement to Black Lives Matter, that we can connect with slavery and the incarceration of people from the plantation to the prison, right? Literally, and lynching in between, that we now see the lynching continue, you know, in a different form. I was speaking with somebody last month, and she shared with me how sad she was as she was working in Santa Monica, and she saw all the beautiful, normal buildings and all boarded up with plywood, right? And how she felt the depression and the load and the fear that created in that environment. And then all I could think is that this is literally the daily lives of a Black person. That when we go around and we see all the stores boarded up with the plywood because something might happen at any moment, that is the reality of the Black community. You know, when we say defund the police, to be able to not be afraid when you see a police officer while you're driving, all that comes to your mind is, am I going to make it home if I even look, right? So the pressing issues and that are happening now that people are seeing has always existed for our community. So right now, I think is the fight for Black lives, the fight for equity, the fight for true liberation, the fight for freedom, so that people can just be able to exist. And one thing I also want to mention, especially for the Black immigrants and the Haitian immigrants, I also always talk about the encampment of the Japanese in America, because when we look at the current prison system for immigrants, that the current system started with Black immigrants from Haiti in the 1980s that were coming as refugees, and in turn they were caged all the way in Guantanamo Bay, to be able to use that as an experiment that can be duplicated and can be used today. So for our community, for me, for what we are dealing with, pressing now has always been pressing. It is a fight for Black lives in every sense of the word.
Thank you. Stan, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would say it's a hard question. I would say for the Japanese American community, what I would see as big things, or two things actually. One is dealing with trauma, and the other is reaching for transformation. So living in a racist society and a racist system produces trauma, and it produces trauma for everybody. I mean, whether you're enacting racist acts or you're the victim of racist acts, it's traumatic. It does something to your psyche, and something that's not good. And being imprisoned does something to your psyche as well, and to your soul. So for our community where everybody got locked away, that's caused a lot of trauma that is still being dealt with, 2 generations on. So dealing with that trauma and realizing that we were only in camp for 3 or 4 years. Black Americans have been living under slavery for hundreds of years, then Jim Crow for another 100 years. And now, the school to prison pipeline and mass incarceration for the last 50 years. So the level of trauma, and then you look at Native Americans and, genocide and reservation systems, and even what's happening on the res with COVID-19, is the level of trauma is so high, and even the people who have been perpetrating the racism, I believe, suffer trauma as well, whether they realize it or not. I think their souls have been damaged by it. And we need to find ways to heal that trauma. So abolishing the police state is one step towards that. Redefining how we want to live together as a community is one step towards that kind of healing. And then transformation. Ever since we got locked down by COVID-19, and then we had the economic catastrophe of everybody losing their jobs, or 30 million people losing their jobs. I really felt like this is a transformative time. And then the Black Lives Matter uprising happened, and I said, "Oh, this is really a transformative time." It exposed so much about society. For years and years and years, we've been told that, well, we can't have healthcare for everybody. That's too expensive. No, we can't have Head Start for every child because that's too expensive. We can't raise the minimum wage because that's too expensive. But then this hits, and all of a sudden, they're saying, that would be billions and billions of dollars. But now they're saying, oh, the economy is collapsing because of COVID. Like, we have to save the economy. So like $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion, we can do it. So what that exposes to everybody is that it was never a question of can we afford it. It was always a question of do we have the will do we have the desire to do it? And I think the response has been very positive, with the uprisings. Even with COVID, all these thousands, maybe millions of people going out in the streets demanding some kind of change, a transformation of the way we run society. And I really feel like this is an opportunity. And I keep telling people, I'm not worried about, because they say, oh, abolition is like, that's like, too far. And I say, don't worry about that. We can worry about that later. I'm not worried about asking for too much. I'm worried about asking for too little, that we'll settle for these little reforms. Because even like with police reform, even the Republicans at this point are saying, yes, let's ban chokeholds. Yes, let's ban tear gas. Yes, let's have de-escalation training mandatory. And, oversight committees set up for the police. And 5 months ago, we all would have said, those are great moves. We should all jump on it. But now it's like, that's not enough. And it's just an opportunity that we really need to grab and keep pushing so that we do transform society and not fall back on, let's reform the status quo and make the suffering a little bit less.
Beautifully said. Do you want to add on anything to that, Silky? You really covered quite a lot.
I saw this quote in Chinatown in the Central International, or like Chinatown International District in Seattle, where it's like the Nelson Mandela quote that it's like, it feels impossible until it's done, or somebody had like and it's just like, yeah, like, okay, like abolition might seem totally impossible, but actually we have to ask for the things that we want. I think I think Stan really hit it. Like, I feel like this moment has illuminated all the fault lines, all the things that aren't working about our society. And I think there's this other quote from Stuart Hall, who is this cultural theorist, British Jamaican cultural theorist, so brilliant. And the quote is like, basically race is the modality in which classes live. So like, we can talk about the way that the economy is impacting Americans, but in reality, the way that is really impacting Americans is Black Americans, people of color, are really being disproportionately impacted. And I think in all the different systems that exist. And I think we have to recognize that if we're going to have a conversation about really reckoning with this moment, and what COVID-19 has illuminated about incarceration, around jobs, around healthcare, that we have to center race in the conversation in all of those instances, and in particular, the experience of Black Americans. And so, whenever the uprisings were happening, I remember my coworkers, we were talking about it, like, what can we learn from this moment? And think about, in our work, what are we doing? And I was like, at some level, I'm just like, we need to ride this and do everything we can to support this, because when Black people are thriving, we're all thriving. That's what I believe. And I think that we need to lean into that and think about what it means for us to create those conditions. So yeah, that's what I would offer.
Yeah, why don't we just go from there? Gerline, how do you think allies, and I don't use that word lightly, but how do you think we can support the Black community? What are the things that we can do to be in true solidarity and not just have sort of this few weeks of social media posts and then go on with our panic over the pandemic? How can we make meaningful change?
Yeah, and that is a great question, Erin. Thank you so much for that. And I can say by starting with doing what we are doing now, right? To be able to take the time to really look into ourselves, because we understand that racism and anti-Blackness is not just an American thing, right? It's a global thing. You know, in different communities, in different nations, in different countries, you have a class of people based on how light and how dark they are. You have in many countries in Latin America where racism is rampant, right? I think it is being able to get into that true understanding, true relationship, and true allyship. And as you mentioned, Aaron, there has been a lot of statements all over social media and everywhere. And a lot of them feels like somebody's checking their black box, right? I did put a statement, so you cannot say that I'm not in solidarity. In the meantime, we have organizations and we have companies that do not have one Black person in you know, in a position of power. And even if they have this person as an executive or as a director, that person still cannot speak their mind. They still have to continue the yes ma'am, yes sir type of mentality. True allyship is being able to build equity, you know, to really understand, as Silky mentioned earlier, that our community, our lives are connected. That, as she mentioned, when Black lives flourish, all lives flourish, because we understand the work that had to be done in order for you and I to even be able to be here, right? I think that in this moment, what we would love to see and what we are looking for is for people to be partners, for people to be true family members as we continue to move. And I'm saying that based on experience, right? When you were putting this together, Silky said, let's get Gerline. You know, let's pull in stand, understanding that this is the basis of community. This is the basis of true allyship and true partnership and true collaboration. Because at the end of the day, my freedom is connected to Silky's, to Aaron's, is to Stan. We are not free unless we are all free. And I think I can speak for myself and for a lot of people that I talk to. We do not want the lip service. It's been happening for a long time. We do not keep your statement, keep your lip service, but be in the kitchen with us. You know, whatever we are cooking, let's prepare that meal together so we can all sit at the table and partake in that dinner. That's how we feel.
That's a beautiful metaphor. I'm ready to cook it up for sure. Continue to cook. Stan, do you have any thoughts on allyship?
Yeah, I think one thing that struck me when Gerline was talking is the none of us are free until all of us are free. I actually looked that saying up, and one of the early versions of that was written by Emma Lazarus, who is the Jewish poet, Sephardic Jewish poet, who wrote the poem that's at the base of the Statue of Liberty. And then it was taken up by a lot of people during the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, including Fannie Lou Hamer and Martin Luther King Jr. And so, and you know, it's been repeated all over the place. Nelson Mandela said a lot of things very similar. So that's that sense of we're all in this together and no one is free until everyone is free is something that really resonates. I think for a Japanese American community, we went through a redress process. We got some reparations And so we feel like, and it's recognized, both in the courts and in the Congress, that what was done was wrong. It was a total violation of the Constitution and of human rights. And therefore, we have sort of the moral authority to say that, detention is wrong. Child imprisonment is wrong. Family separation is wrong, because we went through it, and was recognized by Congress and the president that that was wrong. So we have the moral authority to say that publicly. And I keep telling everyone, if you have the moral authority to say something, then you also have the moral responsibility to say it and step forward. And that's what we need to do now. So that's what I like about Suru for Solidarity and also La Resistencia. One of the things my parents taught me growing up is that you always listen to what people say, but you judge people on what they do. And for Suru, there's a big emphasis is direct action. We're not just going to talk about stuff. We're going to go out and do something. And Resistencia is the same. It's like, and also that they take their lead from the people who are the most oppressed, the people who are actually in detention. So I think that's a good guideline, is you look at who's suffering the most and what they need, and that's how what they say, and that's what should guide your action. And then you got to go act.
Thank you. Silky, anything to add to those powerful comments?
Oh man, this panel, it's incredible. It's so good to be in space with all of you. I mean, I think the only thing I would add is that everything about the immigration enforcement system is the same exact system of policing and incarceration. Like it's not even separate systems. They're like the same thing, essentially. Like, yes, maybe ICE exists on its own, but all the collaborations they're doing are with local police or state police or federal police. Same thing with CBP, Customs and Border Protection. And I think and all the facilities that are used are existing prisons or jails that are used for incarceration generally often. And so I think there's just this also very practical point, which is like, if we're fighting for defunding police and that fight is also the Abolish ICE fight. That fight it's all the same. And that sort of narrative around punishment and risk and the sort of fear-based narratives that are put out there to promote policing and promote incarceration are the same narratives used against immigrants today, and have been used against immigrants for, over 100, for a long time, over 100 years, at least since 1882, right? So I think there's like a, when we think about allyship, it's understanding that actually all these systems are impacting all of us. And again, if we commit to breaking them down, we have to think about everyone who's impacted by that. And there's so much potential there, actually, if we do that, if we expand that. It's not, I don't want to just fight to end ICE and then be fine with the incarceration of other folks, of other people of color in the country, or anyone else for that matter. And so I think that's a really big part of allyship and solidarity as well.
So Stan, do you have a few other things you want to say about the notion of allyship and what true solidarity means at this moment?
Yeah, what I was thinking when Gerlene and you were talking about allyship, what struck me is, immigration has always been a big question mark for Asian Americans. Chinese Exclusion Act in '82, Asian land laws that prohibited Asians from owning land, including South Asians, East Asians, all of them. And that a lot of the rights that we have achieved have been achieved because African Americans, Black Americans were fighting for rights, and they were always fighting for rights for everybody. They never were saying, well, only Blacks need to have this. It was always, everybody needs to have this right. And because they included everybody, we all get those rights. So when the Chinese Exclusion Act was put forward in 1882, Frederick Douglass was one of the few national speakers who came out against it. There was one Black senator during Reconstruction in the Senate when they were voting on it in 1882, and he's the only one who voted against it. When we were pressing for immigration reforms in '65 to get rid of the quotas that, if you were from a white European country, you have a big quota. If you're from an African country or an Asian country, had little tiny quotas. There was not just Asian Americans and not just, but also African Americans who were pressing for expanding that, opening it up. So when the voting rights bill passed, it wasn't just for Black Americans, it was for everybody. So the whole idea that we need to help each other is really, really critical. Solidarity extends in many, many directions. And Black Americans have always been fighting for everybody's rights. And so when we say Black Lives Matter, everybody needs to be fighting for their safety and their rights as well.
Very well said. Let's move on to just sort of talking about where we are in this moment with family separation, detention, and deportation in this country. Silky, do you want to start with some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's what was interesting about COVID happening is that very immediately it started to emerge that there was all these folks who are detained who, even by the law, they don't need to be detained and incarcerated. So people who were in pretrial detention and essentially all immigration detention as we know it under ICE is pretrial detention or civil detention. And so what was really exciting about that moment was that